my name is Michael Dewan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach with over 40 years of experience. I'm currently in private practice in London. This is the 15th video in my series under the title Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. In this video, I'll talk about the ideas of social constructionism and postmodernism as they are used in critical social justice, which is the ideological basis for woke psychotherapy. I will argue that social constructionism is a valid and useful idea, but that when taken to the extreme and combined with extreme postmodernism, it is destructive, both to individual mental health and social cohesion and harmony. I will also argue that social constructionism is often understood in a superficial way, and that critical social justice applies it inconsistently as it suits its narrative and agenda. These are not trivial matters. They're at the heart of how we determine, individually and collectively, what's true and what's not, which is necessary for making even the most trivial of decisions. So what is social constructionism? It's the theory that we develop knowledge of the world in a social context, and that much of what we perceive as reality depends on shared assumptions. From this perspective, many things we take for granted and believe to be objective reality are actually socially constructed. As such, what we take to be true can change over time. This idea started with George Herbert Mead in the late 19th century and was developed further by Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky in the early 20th century. Vygotsky, I think is how you pronounce it. And then in 1966, Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman published The Social Construction of Reality. So the idea has been around for a while, and I think it's valid and useful and non-controversial as an insight. I think we can agree with that. With the emergence of postmodernism and that way of thinking in the 60s and 70s, the very idea of the possibility of objective truth was brought into question. It wasn't simply that some of our knowledge might be based on socially agreed assumptions that could be proven to be wrong. Nothing could be proven to be true, because everything asserted to be true could be deconstructed and shown to be an assertion made for the purposes of oppressive power and without any objective reality. Reality itself merely a construct to serve the powerful. This is routinely the assumption whenever critical social justice declares something to be a social construct. Here are just some of the things that critical social justice finds problematic and tries to deconstruct with this logic. Race, gender, sexual orientation, family, illness, disability, norms and values of any kinds, traditions, institutional systems, and even terrorism. It's worth noticing that critical social justice is inconsistent in its dismissal or condemnation of items on this list. For instance, race is considered a social construct, but critical social justice takes an essentialist view on it when this serves its purposes. The same with gender. Gender is a social construct when it comes to challenging heteronormativity and an innate inner knowing of a reality often considered present at birth when advocating for transgender issues. The same inconsistency is present when it comes to its critical view of any values or norms that it's deemed to be oppressive, while not applying the same scrutiny to its own increasingly oppressive and equally socially constructed values and norms. There's another form of constructionism that critical social justice doesn't talk about, but I think it's important to acknowledge. It's called cognitive constructionism, pioneered by Jean Piaget, you may be familiar with. It's not just that social forces exert influence over what we take to be knowledge. Our very brains, nervous systems, and processes of learning constrain what and how we can know anything. Our brains, through our senses, filter the information we receive, sort and prioritize it in terms relevant to survival, organize it into manageable conceptual categories to expedite decision-making processes. The actual world out there is only sampled and then processed by our brains, constrained by necessities we're only dimly conscious of. So, whatever we take to be true will be arrived at through a process of construction, both socially at the collective level and cognitively at the individual level. There's no getting out of it. My argument is not that social constructs are not a thing. In fact, I'm pushing the whole constructionism idea even further with cognitive constructionism. This should make us very humble about making truth claims. My argument is, and this is important, that making truth claims is necessary and inevitable based on the way the brain and social groups work. And by work, I mean make it possible for human beings to continue living, both individually and collectively. This is our predicament. We have to pretend to know things, even knowing they might not be true, and be prepared to change our minds if they can be proven to be false. To ascribe malevolent intentions to all truth-claiming, reducing it to oppressive power agendas that can be rhetorically deconstructed, misses the fact that there is a more fundamental reason why we construct truths. This is how we've evolved, both individually and culturally. It facilitates our survival. Do we really want to fuck with this and deconstruct it into oblivion? While it's true that nothing can be known or collectively understood pristinely independent of social and cognitive constructions, this does not undercut any and all truth claims. If we really believed this and tried to live according to it, we would undercut our ability to function as individuals as well as our ability to establish and maintain any social cohesion or harmony. While critical social justice will level the accusation of social construct at ideas, beliefs, or values that it disagrees with, it acts as if its own assertions are exempt from any such contamination. It's very selective about which truths are deemed unreliable at best and oppressive at worst, apparently with no capacity for introspection and no tolerance for disagreement. In its attack on the Western tradition, including the scientific method and rationality that came out of what we call the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, it seems to forget that religion had a stranglehold on truth. What it attacks now originally arose to overcome a tyrannical monopoly on truth exerted by the church and offer a way for anybody to discover new truths or debunk old ones. Of course, the Enlightenment seemed to throw a baby out with the bathwater. All of those non-material aspects of life that cannot be empirically measured. So it was understandable that Romanticism emerged in the late 18th century. It's also understandable that Postmodernism would emerge in the 20th century to question the hegemony of science. And if the rise of science and rationality ushered in the death of God, it's also understandable that a God-shaped hole appeared in the psyches of so many people. Some, including the linguist John McWhorter, comedian and social commentator Andrew Doyle, and others, have suggested that critical social justice has been the new substitute to fill that hole. It does seem to replicate many of the same things found in religion, like a higher purpose to serve, its demand for unquestioning faith in its dogma, and for some, an original sin. I believe the way forward is to have a reliable method for making provisional truth claims as free as possible from personal feelings and agendas and ideological bias. And by the way, personal feelings can be evidence or even proof that an individual experiences feelings. What it is not evidence or proof of is social conspiracy theories. The scientific method was created to provide such a reliable method. Select an object for study, gather evidence and data, or construct an experiment that can yield data, use reason to evaluate that, offer a conclusion or a theory that makes sense of the evidence, submit it to a community of peers adequate to confirm or falsify whatever conclusion has been offered. If confirmed, add it to the bank of human knowledge until or unless one day more evidence and or a better conclusion can be reached. If proven false, discard it. When critical social justice challenges all of this as simply the oppressive imposition of white supremacy with their superficial understanding of social constructions and a dose of postmodernism and a cup of decolonization to boot, we should not be so ready to abandon it. What do they offer instead? A simplistic, reductive narrative about the oppressed and the oppressor, which is to be accepted in all of its details on faith. They are great at destroying, not so great at creating. Standpoint epistemology is its claim to truth. Lived experience, but then only if that lived experience of any individual corresponds to and confirms their narrative for what that person's experience should be, given their characterization of the identity group that that person belongs to. Using critical social justice's own methods for deconstructing ideas they don't like, social constructionism and postmodernism, guess what else could be deconstructed? Justice, privilege, microaggressions, cultural appropriation, diversity, colonialism, intersectionality, oppression, equity. And while we're at it, why not add reality, truth, morality? That a concept or idea or narrative is socially constructed does not make it automatically without truth or usefulness, including all of the items on this list. Any truth claim must be supported by evidence, however, and its usefulness argued for, including items on this list. It should also not claim to capture the entire truth, and it should allow for competing or complementary truths as long as they are also backed by evidence and reason and are falsifiable. Now, in keeping with my intention for this series, I want to offer an alternative to critical social justice that preserves its recognition of social constructs as well as its concern for social justice without succumbing to its simplistic reductionisms and sleights of hand. It's called integral methodological pluralism, as put forward by the integral thinker Ken Wilber. Methodological, in this sense, refers to epistemologies, or the means for pursuing knowledge. This approach embraces that there is a plurality of epistemologies, including but not limited to standpoint epistemology. Integral methodological pluralism is consistent with the basic integral principle of avoiding quadrant reductionism, which I'll explain in a minute. Because this is quite vast in its reach, and due to time constraints, I'm only able to give a brief and simplified sketch of it here. In fact, in this model, each of the four quadrants has two perspectives, each with its own epistemology. What I'm sharing here, therefore, is super simplified. Okay, let me take just a brief moment to explain the idea of the integral quadrants and particularly the idea of quadrant reductionism. Integral theory posits that there are four basic perspectives that we can take, and these are based on two different pairs of realities. One is the individual and the collective, and the other one is the interior and the exterior. So if you arrange them that way and draw a line and they intersect, you get the upper left-hand quadrant, which is the interior of the individual, which is the mind of an individual. My mind, your mind. The upper right quadrant is the exterior of the individual, which is my body or your body or any individual's body. The lower left quadrant is the interior of the collective, which is intersubjective experience, relationships, and so forth. The lower right quadrant is the exterior of the collective, which is the environment around us, which includes the natural environment and the entire civilizational infrastructure. So these are 4 fundamental perspectives that we can take. There are also 4 different areas in which we can gain knowledge. So what integral theory warns against is quadrant reductionism, which is taking one perspective and claiming that it explains everything. And you could reduce to any one of these 4 quadrants and claim to explain everything. Integral methodological pluralism says, no, let's honor the truths that can be found in each of these quadrants. So the means of pursuing knowledge for each quadrant. I'm only providing a limited sampling of the kinds of knowledge-seeking methods that are used for each quadrant. In the upper left-hand quadrant, or the interior of the individual, we could call mind or subjectivity, the methods are phenomenology, introspection, contemplative practices, for instance, meditation, perhaps journaling. In the upper right-hand quadrant, the exterior of the individual, we could call the body. We have physiology, neuroscience, behavioral sciences. In the lower left, or the interior of the collective, I call relationships. We could call it culture. We have hermeneutics and semiotics, the study of the meaning of symbols, anthropology and sociology. In the lower right, exterior of the collective, I call the environment. We have ecology, economics, systems analysis. Again, I confess, this presentation is a crude simplification of integral methodological pluralism. If you are already familiar with this, that will be obvious. However, my purpose here is to merely suggest its general intention of epistemological inclusivity, that there are a lot of different ways to know. For those whose curiosity has been roused, I'll leave a couple links below to more information on this, including an example of it being applied to the issue of racism. From an integral point of view, many of the problems human beings face today cannot be properly understood or addressed by the knowledge or solutions offered by any one quadrant's epistemology. What is required is an integration facilitated by a multidisciplinary approach, or in the language of critical social justice, different ways of knowing. This methodological pluralism not only does not privilege critical social justice's reduction to characterizations of collectives, it also does not privilege the materialistic reductionism of classical empirical science. They are both included, but neither is privileged. Inquiry into individual mystical experiences is even given a seat at the table. But in their eagerness to deconstruct and decolonize the Western tradition and showcase indigenous ways of knowing, critical social justice fails to recognize or be grateful for the shoulders of the giants they are standing on. In trying to take over, instead of just adding a perspective to the hard-won fund of civilizational knowledge, they risk depriving the next generation of benefiting from their rich cultural heritage of knowledge. If allowed to continue, I fear this will have profoundly destructive consequences, not limited to the quality of psychotherapeutic practice, which will be one casualty. Let me conclude by getting right to the point. Without at least provisional acceptance of inevitably constructed knowledge and truth, both individuals and collectives would descend into chaos and dysfunction. With no reliable truth to begin to orient ourselves, we could not even recognize or agree that our dysfunctional state of chaos is not ideal, to say the least. I've noticed that some who've gone down this path have concluded that it would be a good thing, or at least no loss, if the entire human species went extinct. I don't know about you, but that's not a train I choose to board. Thanks for staying with me to the end. I appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment, share the video with a friend or even an enemy if you think they'll benefit. And until next time, Take care of yourself and each other, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.